Hi, my name is Jessica Sams. I put together this informational webinar to mark the 10th anniversary of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I'm a website content specialist within the communications section of the Executive Director's Office in the Department of Personnel and Administration. I manage DPA's website migrations, and I provide website content strategy and training for content managers who work in our various divisions and agencies. I'd like to show you a kickoff video from Lieutenant Governor Primavera. Just a moment.
Colorado Lieutenant Governor Diane Primavera, a brunette woman, appears on screen in front of a window in Whitewall.
Good afternoon. My name's Diane Primavera, and I'm the Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Colorado. I'm excited to kick off today's Global Accessibility Awareness Day event. The Polis Primavera administration is committed to a Colorado for all, and that includes digital accessibility. I began my career as a vocational rehabilitation counselor in a time when computers were not widely used and the internet was not in anyone's home. That shows you how old I am. Since then, the evolution of technology and innovation has been incredible. Modern technology can be an amazing tool for people with disabilities, but only if developers consider inclusive design. That's why I'm proud of the Colorado Office of Information Technology's technical standards that supports accessible use of our state websites. Theresa Montano will review these standards later on in this webinar. And when people create accessible documents and web pages, it expands access for everyone, not just people using screen readers. Last August, Governor Polis signed an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Executive Order. This order included an explicit directive for the Department of Personnel and Administration to do several things, including creating statewide standards of accessibility to guide agencies in ensuring state buildings, systems, vital documents, community meetings, and other communications and resources, including websites, are accessible to all Coloradoans, regardless of ability or language. Where applicable, these standards shall be at or above the standards required in the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. So thank you all for joining us today for this webinar to bring awareness to digital accessibility. I hope this webinar inspires continued action to make the World Wide Web truly accessible for billions of people who use the internet every day to make a living, get an education, and connect with each other.
So I apologize. This is a re-recording of the very beginning of this webinar. We did have ASL interpreter for this section, but with the re-recording, I do not have that. So I'm going to throw out a term here, assistive technology. People who are disabled use various types of assistive technology, including the most talked about example of the screen magnifiers and the screen reading software for the blind and low vision community. How many people could possibly be using any type of AT? Is it 21%? Because that is the percentage of adults in Colorado with some type of permanent disability. Well, does anyone here wear glasses? Would you be able to do your job if you lost your glasses? That's assistive technology. Who on this call has a smartphone? Have you ever zoomed into some text or dictated a text message? That's assistive technology. With these examples, I hope to show that accessibility helps everyone. Today, I have 3 speakers lined up who will introduce you to their work. First up is Theresa Montano. Part of OIT's mission is to serve people who serve Colorado with technology solutions to enable them to achieve their business needs. And those technology solutions need to be usable by all executive branch employees and the public when applicable. I'd like to introduce OIT's Accessibility Solutions Architect, Theresa Montano. Theresa ensures digital inclusion for all people who need access to the websites, applications, forms, documents, and other information that is provided by the state of Colorado.
Client in 3 years, there will be a fine. So it's very important. We're all paying attention to this now. Suddenly there's accountability and we all really need to participate and make sure we're being responsible. I want to go on now and talk a little bit about the WCAG. And this is important because it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's part of the worldwide consortium. It's a law, so we need to pay attention to this. It's broken into 4 principles, which are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And when we talk about perceivable, so this is a website. Let's say you're looking at the .gov website, and there's a logo. When you're using assistive technology, an image or a picture or anything that's like a screen share, the talking software cannot decipher that. So if there's, let's say, a state logo, it needs to have an alt text. And that would just simply say state logo. It's important information because that would help someone who's using a screen reader know that they're on the right landing page. So, you know, the images need to be described with the alt tag if they are conveying some sort of important information. If it's just decorative, we don't have to worry about it. And the perceivable part of this is also captions for the videos. We just need to make sure all the information is getting distributed so that everyone has the same opportunities. The operable part is interesting because everything needs to be able to function only with the keyboard. So we like to tell our testers when they're testing, turn off your monitor, unplug your mouse, and when you're using JAWS and you're going through a website, see if you can get to where you need to go, see if you can find the buttons, see if you can go to the links, if you can enter into a data field, into an edit field, your information. This all has to be done through the keyboard. I think one of the challenges we'll do, what I'd like to do next year, I read this somewhere, some company was doing this, asking all of the employees for the challenge today to unplug their mouse and try and do work for 15 minutes without a mouse. And I thought that was a great idea.
Yes, that is a suggestion that really helps people understand what accessibility really means. Try to send an email without the use of a mouse. Try to draft a Google Doc without the use of the mouse. You'll be surprised.
Right. The next piece of this was understandable when you're creating a website, just to make sure that it's intuitive and understandable. So the paragraphs are in chunks, or the links are obvious where they say it's linking to XYZ destination and it's opening a window. So that just all needs to be very clear and intuitive. And robust is the fact that it can be used on different devices because it's been coded in universal design and code. So those are the 4 principles.
Yes, that is POUR, P-O-U-R. And then to move us along, we have some technical standards that are available for everybody at the state. Were you going to talk about the 01 and 02?
Right, so our technical standards we have are what I was talking about, the WCAG 2.0. That's one technical standard. We have another technical standard that is for software and hardware. The state has JAWS. The JAWS means Job Access Workspace, and that's what we use. That's the state standard for talkie software. So we always are updating, the JAWS is always getting updated, and we always need to make sure we're in the most current version, especially with the Google tools that we use. And then I wanted to talk about Site Improve, because with this new bill coming up, we'll be benchmarking every website using the Site Improve tool. And that just means it's going to crawl every website and give us a benchmark. And that benchmark, we can only find 30 to 35% of the errors. We'll always have to go back and do some manual testing. So right now I'm working with Leslie Crandall's team. We're ramping up our testers. We've got we've got JAWS. We're going to be teaching some basic navigation with JAWS to the test team, and we'll be working on a curriculum with them for JAWS, for Windows, the iOS, and for TalkBack with the Androids. So this will include mobile work also. So we're really excited about that. All of that training will be happening in June.
Thank you. And before we pass it off to Laurie, who's up next, did you want to talk about the upcoming?
Oh, for sure. Thank you. The big news is, the great news is that we have full support from our CIO, Tony Neal-Grice, and from our executive leadership team to build out the accessibility program office, which now consists of just me. So I'm overwhelmed, and that's all I'll say about that. But I'm very excited about this new program. Debbie Blythe, our Chief Information Security Officer, is working with me on this. We are building it out in the same framework that the security office was built. And so we're going to have, it will be fully staffed. We'll have all the tools that we need for testing, for developing, for training. I'll have the software engineers for all of that. And we're very excited about this. Will be a concept paper for next year.
Thanks so much, Theresa. And now it's time for our next speaker, and that's Laurie Kubitz. She is a user experience designer and accessibility advocate who's been with OIT for 2 years. She's built relationships with agency web services teams in an effort to provide accessibility, support, and advocacy to agencies collectively. She understands that people with disabilities must be included in the design and testing of technology and services from the very beginning. Because at the end of the day, inclusive technology and services are the results of an inclusive design process. Go ahead, Laurie.
Thanks, Jessica. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I've really had, it's been a privilege to get to know many of you and to find out your pain points and goals all around accessibility, and the stories that you've told about the need to provide accessible and usable services to Coloradans has been very heartfelt from me. And so I'm really happy to be able to talk about the tools that we can share with you to support your effort in being inclusive and accessible. So we have our standards, and they can be a little intimidating. They're very important, but sometimes they're difficult to know how to apply it. And where do you start? So I've been working on putting together some accessibility guides that will address the many different roles that a web services team or an agency team might have. Within those role guides, we have the impact, so you can understand how important it is. We have a how-to guide and the actual responsibilities for that role that we are recommending. So I'll go through and list some of these roles that we're including in an MVP. These will be listed on the OIT website. We're actually redesigning our OIT website, and we're really excited to be able to provide these resources along with that project. The role guides are going to include leadership, product owners, and project managers. So like Theresa said, really accessibility has to be built in from the very beginning, along with UX and any designers that are engaged in a product project, content creators, because we're all content creators. Anytime you send an email, create a document, all of that, we need to be having accessibility in the front of our mind from the very beginning with that content creation. We have a guide for technology purchasers or procurement services, including a product and services accessibility pre-purchase checklist. So kind of a guide, to go through the steps when you're working with a vendor. And then a guide for developers as well. So like I said, it will include responsibilities for each of those roles, how-tos, and tutorials, so you can stay kept up on all of that information. The other part of these guides is the actual technical guides. And these will include, just from the beginning, we will be growing these after we get some feedback, but a plain language guide, because being able to speak in plain language has a huge impact on the accessibility and the usability of all of our products. We're including how to write accessible or create accessible PDFs and documents, starting with page structure. It's so critically important that we are just structuring our documents efficiently and correctly so that screen readers can read them, but also people with cognitive disabilities, so it's easier to scan, or people who are dyslexic. We have a really clean structure that's easy to follow. And then we have, of course, guides for links, forms, images, and then it will keep growing from there. We're also going to be updating the state accessibility statement. So that will be part of our website launch. And all of this will be made available at the beginning of July. We're really looking forward to sharing that with you. I did just want to say that, after meeting a lot of you and working so closely with you, like I said, I'm inspired by how much you care. And we all know that we have a legal obligation for accessibility, but really our goal at the end of the day really is to be inclusive and usable and accessible, and not to meet these minimum standards. So I hope that these guides can help everyone in their individual roles. We will be offering feedback so that we can keep improving on it as well. And in the chat, I'm going to be leaving an invitation to join our digital strategy community of practice. We talk about lots of web and application related usability and accessibility topics, but that's a great place to connect with other people and to learn new things and make connections around accessibility. So please join us. And that is all for me.
Oh, I really appreciate you speaking and describing about your upcoming style guides and standards, Laurie. Thank you. And our next speaker is Travis Vermeulen. And Theresa did talk about the software Site Improve. Travis, he works at the third-party software company Site Improve. He is a senior principal customer success manager. He's been working with web governance and accessibility for over 6 years. Oh, am I on mute? Nope, I'm not. And is an expert in the Site Improve platform. He has a BA in economics from St. Lawrence University and currently lives in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Go ahead, Travis.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks everyone for inviting me today. What I wanted to just start out with is, it is great to see from leadership down to content contributors to management taking accessibility serious at the state of Colorado, because it's something that I've talked with people every day on it, whether it's at the state level, the federal level, or the private level, and it's not something that you can put on one person or one team. So when Theresa really says that, hey, her team's going to expand, I just echo what she says. That's really exciting, and it's really exciting to have the advocates such as Jessica and Laurie. I do want to echo a lot of what Laurie was putting together just on education. So great, we have all of this. We have our accessibility statement, we have the guidelines, legal, and then also just the doing the right thing and inclusive design, making it better. So there is a lot of education that comes into play. We know that, great, we're on board, we're here today. I may not be an accessibility expert tomorrow. I may not be a developer, nor could you be sitting on your side. I don't want to be a developer. I want to make content, but you need to be involved in it as you are writing emails, as you're trying to figure out what is going on. And that's where Laurie and team, Jessica, has put a lot of education in place. And it's something that you're going to have access to in the Site Improve platform too. So different avenues, to be able to help get a handle on what's happening out there. What can I do as a developer, content contributor, UX design into a leadership? What are the questions I should be asking? And something that I wanted to call out too, a lot of times we talk about screen reader technology, or we were talking about tabbing through a website. Well, accessibility and designing an accessible and usable website makes the experience better for everybody. So it could be cognitive, it could be physical, it could be temporary. Something that one of my accessibility consultants always brings up, think if you're holding your baby or you are trying to push a dog away from you, so you're only typing with it. So knowing too that, can I navigate? Can I have the visual cues? Do I have the audio cues? And having that. So what we have up on the screen today is, wow, that's great with the education. That's great that we're going to be held up to certain standards, but how do I track this? What am I going to do with this? And that's where Site Improve can really come into play. What you're going to have access to is being able to benchmark, where am I at? What am I doing today? And then am I going to be able to track progress over time? Because it is a process. We mentioned that, hey, we're going to do some mirroring off of what was done with cybersecurity. It's not something that you can just say, hey, we're accessible. All right, move on. Well, because then someone updates, throws an image on the website. They didn't put alt text in. Well, great, you were accessible at 2:20 on May 20th, and then you put a new media, and it didn't have the accessible functionality for it. So that's where that ongoing maintenance, and then having that visibility into what's changed and how you've been moving forward. With inclusive design and usability too, being able to tie it into what should we be doing as we're looking forward into the future. So Theresa mentioned automated technology, 30 to 40% of what can be pulled up. What's really cool industry-wise with accessibility is there has been an accessibility conformance testing project that's been going on. It's in collaboration with the W3C, part of the WCAG 2.1. So always fun to throw a whole bunch of acronyms at people if they're not too fluent with accessibility. Basically, what you need to know about it is it's setting the standard for how automation should be checking the success criteria, trying to make it more efficient for people that are using certain browser plugins. So everyone should be getting very similar results. And Site Improve helped partner with us to help write these rules and being able to remove a lot of the gray area that's on top of accessibility. People want the, well, is this right or wrong? And that's something that I just wanted to also call out today. Right or wrong is difficult because does it work for one person or does it work for somebody else? So that's trying to then classify, well, tell me your disability. That's not something you should be going out and asking because it should be inclusive. And again, making sure that it's working for everybody. And I love the examples that Jessica said early on, because making a website, making your digital content, making the physical space more accessible, it makes it better for everybody. And I tie it back. It was one of our consultants was telling me, yes, we're talking about digital, but when you tie it to the physical space that everyone, think of the curb cutouts. It impacts someone with mobile, someone with sight, and then even just what's horrible is if we're staring down at our phones and we're looking at the curb cutout, well, hey, we have that little rough bumps to let us know we're about to walk into incoming traffic. So those were some of the big things that I wanted to call it. And then working with other states out there, working with other federal organizations. Again, it's great to see the interest and the actual actions that state of Colorado is taking, because a lot of states have set up their centers of excellence in accessibility to both handle and take care of the digital space and then also monitor the physical spaces of the buildings, which is a huge area. That takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. So it is working with Theresa and her team as it gets spun up. And what a lot of the other states have done is, what are our goals? How are we going to monitor for consistency? And then, as Laurie mentioned, and echoing that, what can we do for education? Because it's not fair to tell people, hey, go make your websites, your digital content accessible, and then you have to figure out how to do that on your own. So that is something too. A lot of good things have been set up in place. And as we get further in the process, having the connections to other states, if people are curious, we can always make more of that. So after today, again, we've had that challenge. Theresa brought up being able to navigate a website without a mouse, that's something that I would challenge everybody to do after today's call, is unplug your mouse, go to your favorite website. Doesn't have to be a state of Colorado website. And can you find the information that you want? And what are your some of the difficulties? But yeah, that's what I had for content today. And thank you again, Jessica and Laurie and Theresa, for the invite.
Thanks, Travis. So OIT does have that enterprise license for site improved tools. So you go through OIT to find out if you can get access to it. So if we want to go to our next slide, thanks to all three speakers. I appreciate you all. And I'm so glad you've had a chance to share this important information with us. For our panel discussion, I would like to introduce two more participants. Christine McGroarty is the Fiscal and Administrative Services Branch Chief for the Health Facilities and Emergency Medical Services Division of CDPHE. She has a BA in Psychology and Creative Writing and a master's degree in Public Administration. She has been visually impaired since birth. Josh Winkler is the awesome Disability Funding Committee Coordinator and Policy Advisor in the Lieutenant Governor's Office. He's a mechanical engineer by training. However, life as a quadriplegic led him to advocacy, which in turn led to his current position. So if we want to go to the next slide, I'm not sure that we even need to be screen sharing or have a slide. If all of us can be on site, I'm on the screen. I'm going to ask a question and we'll go through this order. We'll have Theresa, then Christine, then Travis, then Josh answer the question. So is everybody like unmuted? Hi, Christine, you're unmuted, and Josh, you're on mute. So let's see. First question, can you define the term barrier to accessibility with an example? So what is a barrier to accessibility to you? Theresa's up first. Annabelle, do you want to unmute Theresa?
Zoom webinar audio now unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So just recently, this has happened to me, and it's happened twice, that the team is using Jamboard, and it's not accessible to talking softwares. And who knew until you actually would try and use it? I think we have someone on our advisory board who has talked about it, and it is a Google tool, and it is not accessible. So that is something that did cause where I couldn't participate in the team event.
Thanks, Christine. That's you're having trouble with Jamboard, and thanks, Theresa. And Christine's next.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica, for inviting me, and for everybody for caring about this issue. For my good friends at CDPHE, my example is not about you. So I'm going to use an example from this week, because I would say that I run into an accessibility barrier almost every day. I'm going to give you two. One's just a quick fun one. I was in the office today for the second time in 14 months, not today, on Monday, and I went to the newly renovated ladies' room, and the Braille on the ladies' room sign was incorrect. So there's your physical barrier for the day. My electronic story is I've been in a training all week, a conference from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And the platform that they're using to present their content and their speakers has some accessibility challenges. So there were some pre-sessions that we were supposed to, pre-recorded sessions we were supposed to watch before the actual webinar started, and I was able to navigate myself to the session, to the recording, and click on the recording to get it to the right place. And then the play button was invisible to JAWS. I tried a lot of different workarounds, and there was no way for me to activate that play button without the mouse.
I have seen that so often, you guys, when I proof content for accessibility, it is hard to get to a play button using screen readers. So the question again, what is the barrier to accessibility? Next up, Travis, then Josh.
Yeah, what's both good and also really bad, and I'm glad we're all here today, is so many barriers with digital accessibility is because it wasn't thought of in place when they were designing it. So we're going to introduce this, and hey, we didn't think about having visual focus on a play button or having that call out. So that's one of the barriers like that I see happen. And then where we come in is, well, education. So it doesn't become, well, we didn't think of that. And people start having that design with inclusion in mind. But where I ran into one, and this was more, you do the hover over with the mouse on the top level navigation, which then goes into another menu that you have to go, well, if you don't get that mouse in that right spot, that whole navigation collapses. So it involves both the usability of the website, but then also the accessibility. If I don't have keyboard access, even if it's a touch screen, and I need to then drag my finger. So again, think of that top level navigation that keeps expanding into the additional menus. Can I actually click on that, or does it keep hiding on me so then I can never get to what I want? So that was one that happened very recently.
What do you think, Josh?
I'm kind of laughing at Travis saying that because I use a trackball, so my fingers don't work. That's part of my paralysis is my fingers. And so using a trackball, it works pretty well most of the time. It's like basically an upside down mouse that you have. But falling down those multi-layered menus where you have to keep going, that is irritating at best. But the one that I actually ran into when I took this job was I went and picked up my work laptop, and we were setting everything up, and this was last summer, so we were trying to spend as little time together in a room with anybody at the time, and we go through, we get everything set up, and I use sticky keys, which is where you can basically touch shift and then touch a letter and it'll be capitalized, or touch control and then hit C, copy, and set it up while we were in there setting up everything else. Thought everything was good. All right, good to go. Close the laptop, out the door I go home, and you have to hit Control-Alt-Delete in order to log in on your work computer. That's just a default setting for security on all state computers. And for some reason, sticky keys doesn't turn on until you've logged in. It's a user setting, not a system setting. And I won't tell you how long it took me to figure this out, and how many people had to involve, but it turned out there was an easy solution. One of the ways you can turn on sticky keys is you just hit shift 5 times in a row and it'll turn on. Ended up being an easy solution to the problem, but for a long time, I would sit here at my desk, I would put a pair of scissors in my mouth, I would use one hand to hold down control, another hand to hold down delete, and use the scissors with my mouth to hit shift to log into my work computer.
Somehow that's not safe.
Yeah, it was a simple workaround. It turned out to be a really simple, and I also needed sticky keys because the password required like a number, a letter, a special character, a capitalization.
I know,
and so I also needed it for that. So it was a super big issue for me to be able to get logged into my computer with what turned out to be a super simple solution of I just hit the shift key 5 times before I log in and it works.
Yeah, everybody with PCs, you have this available to you. Hit the shift key 5 times. It used to happen to me a lot in 2013 before I figured out what sticky keys was. And I couldn't figure out how to turn the darn thing off. So
if somebody else uses your computer and you have sticky keys turned on, it could be a barrier to accessibility to those who don't use it.
Yeah. So my next question, guys, can you tell me about a time when you or you felt very happy because something did become accessible? Tell me about a time when you felt a win because something became accessible. Theresa, you're up.
All right, I'm going to give an example, but it's not a state example, but it's something that has transformed the lives of, I'm going to say, every blind person or visually impaired person, and that's using the Uber or Lyft mobile applications and how they created that in a universal design, and it is inclusive, and how it's just the whole product itself has changed our life, where you can get a ride within 3 to 5 minutes. In the old days, we had to wait for a cab, which is 45-minute window either way. And sometimes if they see you with a service dog, they just drive on. So our lives have changed in a big way with this accessible mobile app. And that's something we're looking at with the state to really work with our mobile apps and make them more inclusive too.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's a big change in your life.
Completely.
Yep. Christine, something, a time when you felt a win because something became accessible.
So I'm going to talk about something that is much less global than Theresa's wonderful life-changing example. I'm going to tell you all how much I love scheduling meetings. You heard me correctly. I love scheduling meetings. Google has at some point added a feature to their calendar app by which you just put in the names of all the people you want to come at the meeting, and you hit this button and it gives you a list of the times that work for all the people you identified. Until this life-changing, joyful feature appeared in my life, I was not able to schedule meetings. Because if you think about most of the interfaces to schedule meetings, you've got a calendar and you've got overlapping and you've got color and you got to find the blank space that works for everybody. Not something that I have been able to do for my entire career. So I would have to go to my coworkers and say, hey, can you help me schedule this meeting? Which does not feel good. I like to do my part. I like to be a full contributing member of the team. And so now I'm kind of like, you know, a kid that just learned how to tie their shoes. Like I want to do it all the time. So whenever I'm in a meeting and we talk about scheduling the next meeting, I always volunteer because it makes me so happy.
That is great. Serena also says she's a JAWS user and loves that feature as well.
I'm jealous of that feature.
You're jealous? You know, there's something to be said for independence. We take it for granted when we're fully able to have independence to do what we want when we want. And I love your story, Christine, because it gave you independence to schedule meetings.
Yeah, so this is actually something with Site Improve. So we started back in 2004 in Copenhagen. It was a link checker. We checked for broken links on the website. We kept adding additional functionality, which led us in getting into the accessibility space. We were checking for accessibility, and this is our platform. So we need to practice what we preach. Because it wasn't developed as an accessibility product, there was a lot of additional work and resources it took to make the platform accessible, to allow it to be accessible for screen readers. There were workarounds in place. It may not have been as intuitive as it should. So one of the big wins is we are rolling out, and the state of Colorado has access to it. It's what we're calling next gen accessibility, but it was built with the accessibility foundations in mind and as it was going forward. So whether you're using assistive technology, for those of you that have attended any of our webinars before, I was talking with Keith Bundy, one of our accessibility consultants prior to this call. He's a assistive technology user. We talked about JAWS, and just the way he's brought up in the past is saying it's inherently more accessible. So tying it to Site Improve, knowing that, hey, all of the work that had to be done to practice what we preach to make our product accessible. And then how, I don't want to say easy because it's not, but when accessibility is developed from the get-go, how much better it is and how much easier it is to maintain. So that was really cool to hear about that. And just what I think preaching to the choir here is to be able to see as the large companies, Google, Microsoft, all of them are really going after they're really developing features with accessibility in mind. So I think that's the cool thing to see is years ago, again, I tackle what I said, it wasn't really thought about. It was more, let's patch it in place into, no, we're going to start the design process with accessibility.
And then Josh.
Yeah, so first thing I'm going to do after this meeting is find that feature that Christine's talking about in Google Calendar, because I did not know it was there, and I hate scheduling meetings for that reason. It's always hard to find a time that works for everybody. So that's an amazing thing I got to learn how to use. And I was going to mention, like, I think it's great what Lyft and Uber have done for the blind community and a lot of people with disabilities who are able to use them. It's one of those areas where it's been a struggle because it hasn't helped everybody. There are no wheelchair accessible Lyft or Uber vehicles in the state of Colorado. So I don't fault anybody who uses them. I mean, it has been a game changer for those who have been able to use those. One day we'll get to where they have accessible vehicles too. I'm optimistic. The one I was going to point out though is actually job postings for the state of Colorado. So I can remember back in my advocacy days, applying for jobs just to prove a point that they would never see my resume. So the way the state hiring process works is there's like an HR sweep of the resumes first. And if you don't meet minimum qualifications, you don't get moved on to the hiring managers for most positions. And a lot of jobs for the state of Colorado had been built off a template, to Travis's point of, you kind of start with what you built. They were built off a template that included certain requirements: ability to climb a flight of stairs, lift 20 pounds, and have a valid Colorado driver's license were requirements for a lot of jobs in the state of Colorado. And I can remember back when healthcare policy and financing made a deliberate effort to clean that out of all the jobs that didn't require that. I know DPA has done a lot of that across the board with other requirements that were just kind of got in there over the years. And when, we all do it, we all have a template that we use for a meeting agenda, or in this case, a template for jobs. And they just kind of get added in, and people don't obviously, just take that minute to think, who is this going to make ineligible for this job, who is completely qualified for the job? Ability to travel is a very real thing to have on a job for a lot of positions in the state. You don't need to have a valid Colorado driver's license in order to be able to travel anywhere in this state. And I always point out, like, I have friends who don't drive, who have been to a lot more places in Colorado than I have. And I've been driving for over 20 years, and I've seen less of Colorado than they have. So there are definitely ways to get around the state without driving. So I think was a big win. That was, it wasn't to the point earlier about like all these technical requirements around accessibility standards and stuff. It wasn't one of those. It was just a little thing of taking the time to think about what's really required.
Thanks so much, Josh. That takes us to about time. I did have 2 more questions to ask. I can state the questions. I'll state both of the questions, and then anybody can volunteer if they wanted to have a story they wanted to say. So question 3 was, since we've been working from home, is there anything that has become a new accessibility challenge from you? And question 4 was, what is one thing you wish everyone knew about making digital content more accessible? Do I have any volunteers?
I'm going to take the 3, if I may. So when I told my first story, I didn't tell you how I solved my problem. I solved my problem with a service called IRA, which is a technology solution run through my phone, by which I contact a sighted paid agent who looks through the camera on my phone or gets into my computer. And so I had to call them on Monday to have them click that play button. I would not be able to work from home, but for IRA, I probably call them 5 times a day to help me with something. When I was in the office, I had coworkers, and I could go get somebody and say, hey, can you come click this for me? I would not. It's frightening to me to think, had this happened 5 years ago, I would be out of a job right now.
And I'll just mention one on the last question there. I think that one of the things I learned years ago about digital accessibility in particular and things you're putting on the web is doing things like having the transcript or closed captioning file on a video, or adding image alt text is, Theresa mentioned web crawlers around SiteImprove earlier, but web crawlers are also a word for all the search engines. And all of that becomes data that they catch. So you all of a sudden move up in rankings because you have more words in the search. And so it's actually hugely beneficial for, organizations, companies to put those, alt text and transcripts on videos, because it ends up being searchable by the web crawlers.
The audio now unmuted.
Theresa?
I just want to concur with Christine about IRA, and also to let you know, in our concept paper, as we're staffing up and considering all tools and software for the program office, the accessibility program office, we have IRA built into there. So that's very exciting. And then the last question, I wanted to touch on that, just that we have a moral obligation, a legal obligation, and a civil rights obligation to make our websites accessible so that we can serve everyone in the state of Colorado.
I'd love to end it right there. Thank you, Theresa. I love that wrap-up statement. Seth, do we have any questions from the audience?
I don't see any yet, but let's give it a minute and see if any come in.
Okay, 1 or 2 minutes if you want to type your questions into all panelists and attendees.
We have one. What does IRA stand for?
It actually is not an acronym. It has something to do with Egyptian mythology. It's artificial intelligence. And then the RA is some kind of, I think it's a symbol in Egyptian, some kind of Egyptian connotation. I obviously looked it up quite a long time ago and it didn't stick very well, but it is artificial intelligence, or is the first AI.
And I think part of, so this is with the way ARIA too. I've drawn a web, full disclosure, I just Googled it, but I did know, but it's accessibility rich internet applications. And what ARIA is about helping code the HTML to be more accessible too. So I think there was the service that Christine was mentioning, and then I saw what was typed in. So
yes, those are two different things.
Yep.
I use ARIA labels to help screen readers announce content that wouldn't normally be announced, but Christine uses a service that enables her to be more independent, to allow people to click things she can't see. Is that right? Yeah.
Audio now unmuted.
Yeah, and I think the IRA that we use with the subscription through the camera is AIRA.
Great. So we have another question. I currently have a SiteImprove report scheduled for an agency I no longer support. How can I transfer this report to the new project?
Laurie?
Actually, I'm going to pass this off to Travis. This is a little bit more advanced. Thanks, Travis.
Yep. So you can use if you're in the platform, you can use the chat to our support team. They may direct you to me, but just letting us know. So tve@siteimprove.com, opening up just the floodgates for everybody. But no, let us know, let our support team know who the new person is, and then we can get them set up. Because with the SiteImprove license, there's no limit on users in the platform. So.
Okay, we've got two more real quick, I think. One is, can you repeat the ending of that quote? Because I missed part of it and it was great. We have a moral, blank, and civil rights obligation to make websites accessible.
The audio now unmuted.
I believe I said, we have a moral and a legal and a civil rights obligation to make our websites accessible to all of our residents in Colorado.
And then, do you have any advice on how we bring accessibility needs to the attention of our executive directors to get the funding required to test software?
So I believe that the bill that Theresa referenced earlier in her remarks may be pushing this issue forward. There's some requirements in that bill around executive directors working with OIT and having plans around accessibility. And with the governor's EDI initiative, I think with those two things happening and Theresa getting more resources in the program office, I think that we're all very hopeful that we're going to see a lot more focus and attention and accountability. There's actually been a requirement for 20 years that directors have accessibility built into their plans. And I think now is the time that that may actually get some attention. So keep up the good work and hopefully we'll all meet in the middle.
Great.
Anything else, Seth?
We do have one request for the email that was mentioned. If we could put that in the chat.
Oh, Travis. So being respectful of everyone's time, we are at 2:58 on my clock and it's time to wrap it up. I am so appreciative for the chance to be able to host an event like this and for all the attendees who watched and listened. Thanks again. Did we get the chat? Yes, you can pull the email out of the chat. You're welcome. Somebody said.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank yous are rolling in. You're welcome. And bye-bye. Thanks.